not a good start, is it? So my name is Rob Wormel. I'm a developer advocate on the Angular team at Google. We've been working with Besa and the SharePoint team for a while. And really what we wanted to do is really just give you a little bit of a taste of some new stuff we've been working on the Angular platform. Angular's historically been used for building kind of really large, monolithic applications. We use it at Google to build everything from the applications that get us paid, the applications that take our time. If you've ever applied for a job at Google, you can do that. You're using an Angular application. And of course, things like Google Cloud Platform, that's all written in Angular. But one of the things that happened when we went from AngularJS, or the kind of original framework we had, to Angular, this kind of new rewrite of Angular for the future, is that it got a little bit more challenging to use in situations that kind of weren't that big single-page application idea, right? And so we've been working for the past 6 months or so to really kind of rethink this. We talked to a lot of different customers, and as Angular's become kind of more used in the open source and enterprise worlds, we get feedback that says it's too challenging to use here, right? Or I'd really like to use it in this case. Cases that are not, again, that kind of exact single-page application model. So we started out kind of calling this project Angular Embedded, with the idea of sort of embedding Angular in other contexts. And really it's evolved into sort of what we call elements, Angular elements. And that's kind of what I want to show you today in the context of SharePoint. This is experimental. This is a very, very new thing for us. It's based on some very, very powerful web standards. So what we're doing here is really allowing you to use Angular as it's meant to be used, but kind of it's spitting it out, exporting it into a way that allows it to be used almost anywhere. I think that SharePoint was a really good kind of test case for us because it's a very opinionated way of doing things. You're using React today, and that's awesome. But obviously, it was a good place to make sure that we wanted to be as flexible as possible. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste now of kind of what this looks like, what it looks like to use, and then I have a session after this that we'll dive a lot deeper into.
Just to reiterate that one, right after this one, 11:20, it is in the first level. There's a session where Rob will go more technical details around what the Angular elements is all about.
And now my slides have loaded. Awesome. Cool. So we'll just jump right to the demo. Who out here uses, or first of all, have you heard of Angular? Raise your hand if you've heard of Angular. That's most of you. Who's using it today? Not so many of you. Cool. Let's see if we can convince you to do that. So I've got a very simple setup here. Angular is a framework that's based on TypeScript. We work really, really closely with the TypeScript team. We adopted that really early on in the development process for Angular, and it's been really, really cool to work with. So let's just see what this kind of looks like. So I've got a couple of web parts here. I've got a very simple hello world that I'll start with here. This is your kind of standard web part. This is almost kind of generated directly from the Yeoman command. I haven't really changed anything here. We're just setting it in HTML. And then I've got an Angular sort of baby application running here. So again, this is TypeScript. You can see we're declaring a component. We're declaring an ng module. ng module is kind of the equivalent of a package, if you like. Allows us to bundle together features and components and services and providers. Angular's got dependency injection. Usually when I go to JavaScript conferences and I talk about dependency injection, people are like, what? But I come to a Microsoft conference and I say dependency injection in TypeScript and everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, so that's awesome. Standard HTML, CSS, we just sort of extend the syntax of HTML, so you can see this is a standard HTML template. We're binding to the name property here, and this is just a class, and we're saying, right, we're going to have a name. This can be set from the outside world, and this is kind of how we link things into SharePoint. So what we're saying is that this is a component, it takes input, information is handed to it, and then it's Angular's job to take that and just kind of render it on the screen. Then all we're really going to do here is do a little bit of magic. This is the new bit of Angular that we're working with. So this is the idea of basically registering Angular components as web components. Web components have been around for a couple of years. Things like the Polymer team at Google have been using them. We haven't used them early on. We didn't think really they were ready for kind of the things that we wanted to do, but more recently there's been some features that have been added that make it really, really useful for Angular. And it turns out that actually this makes it really, really easy to glue it into things like SharePoint. So all we're saying is bringing in this sort of registration line from Angular, just registering our little element that we created, a little bit of hookup here. And then we can go straight into our web part. At the top here, I'm just saying go ahead and import those elements that I created. And what this does is it registers it with the browser natively. They're actually registered with the browser. This is a native API. And then we can just go straight into our DOM element here and say, cool, set it to this hello world. With any luck here, let's try this out. Go ahead and create a new these. And so you can see we're going to start with undefined because I haven't actually set anything yet. Go to the edit box. My name is Rob. Great. So I don't know if you've tried to do this with Angular already. There's a lot of machinery, a lot of setup to make that work. Let's kind of extend this out a little bit. This is significantly easier to do than it used to be. So I'm going to go ahead and add an input here. It's going to have a description. We'll just set this to something. If I go back into my template here, add another P. One thing I just want to point out here, so we're in HTML, right? We're using standard HTML syntax. We're kind of enhancing it with Angular syntax, these kind of double curly braces. This is how we've always done Angular, but one of the kind of early problems with Angular is that you could do this and you could get it wrong, and it would, you wouldn't know. You'd send your applications out to production, and it sort of wouldn't actually know that this was going to fail. So if I get this wrong and I say something like description, it's going to complain at me. It's going to say, we don't know anything about that, right? I can go back and just clean it up. Get IntelliSense for this in the template, which is really nice. Cool. Say my description is whatever. The basic thing. And then all we're going to do, like you do in the basic Hello World template here, is we can either do something like setting this directly, and we say description. We'll just say this dot properties dot description. Great. Close that. And so again, notice here that there's nothing Angular specific about this. This is completely standard DOM. This is completely standard web components. These work like an input, like a div, like a paragraph, like anything you've used in the browser before. This is nice because if you have a team of people who are building Angular applications, but you also want them to maybe build web parts or extensions, those teams can create these things, right? But the people who are creating web parts, the people who may not be Angular developers, can consume them with basically no knowledge of Angular. Right? This is completely standard HTML. So we can go into our web part config here, go ahead and just cheat a little bit, put another one of these in here, we'll say description, and if I jump back over here, you can see MG Hello World. Don't know why those turned into boxes, interesting. I think that's the edit button. Waiting for our rebuild. Cool. Helps me hit save. Start.
And while that's doing that, one of the challenges, right, Rob, currently has been that if you really work on the Angular in the SPFX world, your bundle sizes are getting huge.
For sure.
So this one will make sure that your bundle size, which essentially has an immediate impact on the performance of the page, will remain small.
Yep.
And much, much, much smaller, so significantly smaller, which will basically enable you to use Angular in the context of SharePoint framework. But the bundle sizes were so big that it basically blocked Angular usage properly in SharePoint Online.
For sure, and Angular is a compiled framework. It means that we take the HTML, the CSS, and we run them through our own compiler, right? Rather than running that at runtime, doing all this work which slows applications down, we call this AOT compilation. This has been something that's actually been really challenging previously to get into SharePoint. I should just mention that this demo is running Angular's AOT compiler. We're not shipping that compiler. These packages come out sort of under sort of 50K of your basic application, and you can extend them out further than that. Just one more quick demo, and then I said we can dive deeper this into my session. The basic graph one going on here. So just going to show you the setup, right? We've got, again, a quite kind of similar idea here. I'm just using a slightly different API here. I'm actually just grabbing this from the custom elements API in the browser. This is baked into the browser today. Creating a new instance of this element, right? New GraphDL element. Setting the context. This is that context coming from the SharePoint side of things. We're just handing that to the element itself, and then we're just appending the instance of this element into the DOM. So then if I go actually look in here, so again, we're just going to take that context as an input. We're in TypeScript here, so we get type completion. All that stuff is nice. And then I'm just making a quick call out to the Graph HTTP client. Using the Graph HTTP client, we're going to go fetch the groups and try rendering those. So I'm going to go to my template here. I'm the one who graphs, so I should probably clean that up. So we'll say, hey, graph demo. And so the idea of Angular, right, is that we want to be declarative. And so rather than saying how to render this thing, we just want to sort of declare, hey, I'd really like you to render this stuff. So we're going to go ahead and say UL, put an LI here. This is NG4. NG4 says we're going to hand you some data. We just want you to go ahead and render it. I'm going to say for let group of groups, that's just kind of standard ES syntax for iteration. This is async. This is going to come off of the Graph API. So rather than kind of unwrapping that and dealing with all this, we can just tell Angular, hey, we're going to get you some data at some point in the future. Go ahead and pull it in with any luck again. So I'm going to pull it here. So Angular knows, right, that because this groups is coming from our typed context here, or our typed groups here, which is, you know, going to return a promise of an array of Office 365 groups, and we've got that typed up at the top here. I should be able to hear and say group. And again, I get type completion because we know what that thing is, and I can say, all right, go ahead and show me the display name.
And once again, that's a great example why TypeScript is super powerful. And Angular team is using TypeScript.
Yeah, completely. One of the things that just while we're waiting for that to reload, last week I should mention that the Angular team's been working, you know, on TypeScript in Google for a long time. Last week, TypeScript became a completely unrestricted language inside of Google, so now pretty much every major team at Google is starting to use TypeScript, which is kind of great for the whole ecosystem. I'm going to go ahead and pull this in. Of course, this isn't going to run because I'm in the local workbench. Remember that, practiced that last night. Jump over to the real one. It's not going to make me log in again. That's good, because I've already forgotten that password. Cool. Just wait for that to wake up. That is not going to wake up. Is it going to wake up? Let's see what happens. Thinking. Let's try that again. This has been a really interesting experience to Active Share. This is SharePoint's a thing that I had never really used before. Obviously, we don't use it at Google. So it's been a really pretty interesting learning experience for me to kind of figure out how these things all plug together. It's actually really nice to have this kind of integrated online workbench thing.
Yeah, that was powerful. Yeah, exactly. What about the other things on SharePoint framework and the development experience in general? Any ideas for the?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned over doing this is that there are some things that we've done that are maybe slightly different than the things that you've done. Looking at it, we're not that different though, and I think there's some stuff that we could do to really kind of bring these things together in a pretty nice way. Not quite sure.
Maybe we'll demonstrate that properly in your demo.
What that one goes. So we can check this out in the demo. There it goes. Yeah, thanks.
But it does work. Thank you, Rod. Cool. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Absolutely. How many times seen in Microsoft having a keynote, and that we are inviting actually Google to do one of the core demos from the keynote perspective? That's pretty cool. And thank you, Rob, for the demo. Rob has the session at 11:20 in the level 1. I can't remember actually the actual location, but I do apologize. My memory is getting bad. I'm getting old, I know. But let's wrap up the keynote. So we went through, so not like maybe I mentioned that already a few times. So this is a developer keynote. We want